we see Mary Hartley, and indeed every other character, through Charles' eyes. But there are moments here and there where we can see what he truly thinks of them. Hi, my name is Juan. Welcome. I hope you're doing well. So today I'm here to do the first of a series of book reviews for my 12 books for 2022 reading project. You can check out the schedule on the announcement video, so I'm going to link to that here and in the description box for this video. If you check out that video, if you haven't seen it yet, you will find all the 12 books that we will be reading along this year. I'll tell you also how the reading project is going to work and so on. So at first, when I made that announcement video, I wasn't sure how I was going to actually deal with the books in terms of how I was going to talk about them here. So I thought that I would just include them in my monthly wrap-ups. But then I thought that not everyone following the reading project or reading along would be interested in hearing me talk about the other books that I've read in a month. And also they might want to hear me just focus on one book at a time for a whole video. So I took to the community tab and I created a poll, and I asked you directly whether you wanted me to do a video review for each of those 12 books as the year progresses. Now, at the time of filming this video, which is Wednesday, whenever it is in March, I don't know what day it is today, but anyway, it's a Wednesday. So this video will come out on Saturday, okay? So by the time of making this video, 90% of you said yes. You said that you wanted me to do a video review. 10% of you said no. I don't know why, but I hope you won't hate me for making these videos. Anyway, that 10% who was very against my making them, but anyway, I'm just joking. Of course, I wanted to hear your opinion, but you know, 90% seems like an overwhelming majority, so here I am. And so how this is going to work from now on, this is a bit different, okay? Because this is coming into March, and this book was the book for February, okay? We started the reading project in February, not in January. I'll explain all of that in the announcement video, but so this is going to be a bit different. But from now on, what I'll do, or what I'll aim to do at least, is to do a book review for the book of the month on the last week of that month, okay? So that means that there are going to be 2 reviews in March. There's going to be this one, okay, which is about the book for February, but then at the end of the month, there will be one about the book that we're reading in March. And then in April, at the end of April, there'll be a review for the book that we're reading in April, and so on and so forth. I hope that's clear. Today we're here to talk about the first book, which is The Sea by Iris Murdoch. So this great novel was the novel that I chose for the month of February. So I hope some of you read along with me, because this is an incredible novel. Now, if you haven't read The Sea, I hope that watching this video will make you read it, because it is an amazing novel, and I will talk about my reading experience with it a bit later on. But I think it's a book that everyone should read, really. And you know, I'm not gonna spoil it, okay? I'm gonna talk about the book at length, but I'm not gonna spoil it. That's a rule of thumb for me. I don't spoil books in my reviews, and everything I say about the plot is not gonna go beyond what you will find on the dust jacket or in a synopsis or stuff that happens in the first few pages of the novel, okay? So this was my first Iris Murdoch novel. It will not be my last. It seemed like the obvious place to start because it won the Booker Prize from 1978. So this novel is from 1978, but it feels very current. I don't think it's outdated a lot. So when I was actually reading this novel, The Sea, before I finished it, I was having such a great time that I took to Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter, by the way, at JuanReads. So I went on Twitter and I asked if there were any fans out there, any fans of Iris Murdoch, and I'm not going to say I was overwhelmed, because I welcomed all the responses I got, but I got lots of recommendations of, I got different people's favorite novels by her, and I got a list of recommendations. So I actually now have a list of novels by Iris Murdoch that I want to get to at some point, you know. Now, Iris Murdoch, as you probably know, was an English writer. She's sadly no longer with us, and she had quite a sad demise because she very famously, very publicly suffered from Alzheimer's disease. And I say very publicly because her husband wrote different biographies of her, and there's also that famous movie with Kate Winslet and Judi Dench. And I've never seen that movie or read the diaries, but somehow, you know, I kind of knew a little bit about that. I knew that aspect of her. I also knew that Iris Murdoch was incredibly prolific, and that's always a problem when you haven't read anything by an author who's very prolific, because where do you begin, right? So Iris Murdoch, I think, published more than 20 novels, 26, I think. So where do you begin? So The Sea seemed like the obvious place to start because it won the Booker Prize. I don't think literary prizes are that important, or they're not very important to me in terms of how I choose what books to read, but you know, it highlighted this book, and it's also the kind of book that you will see a lot. Like when I lived in England, you know, most bookstores will have a copy of The Sea. So it seemed like the obvious thing to read. I don't know if it's the best first novel. I don't know if it's the best entryway into Iris Murdoch. People who have read her novels have different opinions. I've only read this one, and it was great, and it's made me want to read more by her. So it was a great entry point, at least for me. Okay, so what is the novel about? So in the novel, there is this central character, amazing character, one of the most fascinating characters I've ever read about. His name is Charles Arrowby. So who is this guy? Okay, so he's in his 60s. The novel, I think, just spans a few days, maybe a few months, okay? So he's the same age throughout. So he's in his 60s, and he's a retired playwright and theater director. So he comes from that wonderful background, you know, that wonderful world of theater and actors in London, okay? You can kind of picture it. He's also quite egocentric, and he had a reputation for being a tyrant at his work. Okay, so that's the old Arrowby. It's not the Arrowby that we see at the beginning of the novel, because he's trying to move away from that, okay? And I'll go into that in a bit. He had lots of love affairs with different stars, female actresses or female actors, you know what I'm saying, women. He's most definitely heterosexual. He's now retired, and he just wants peace and quiet, or that's what he claims he wants, right? So he moves to this house, this big, drafty, uncomfortable house by the sea in England. So it's not really very warm. He goes swimming every day, but it's not warm. And the book really begins as his memoirs. He sits down and he writes his memoirs. So he writes about what he's doing every day. So we get a lot about his daily routine. And I found that a really delicious part of the novel, because his routine, I mean, there's nothing special about it, and the way he talks about it makes it sound really special and appealing. But when you stop to think what he's doing, particularly what he eats every day, it's not really very appealing. But he has a way of writing about it that makes it seem appealing. He makes it very clear that he wants to be alone. But then what happens, of course, that's the last thing he gets, okay? So all kinds of people keep showing up, sometimes literally on his doorstep. So the people who show up are people he knows very well. He knows them very well. They're people from his past. They're people from his life. So they're former colleagues and actors, people like that. But then one key person that shows up one day is his first love, Mary Hartley Fitch, whom he calls Hartley, okay? Everyone calls her Mary. He calls her Hartley. That should give you an idea of the kind of person that he is, okay? So we see Hartley, or Mary Hartley, through him, okay? And so the way we see her, or the way he wants us, the way Charles wants us to see Hartley, is that she's trapped in a loveless marriage, even in a kind of abusive marriage, okay? We don't know how much that's true. I mean, Charles Arrowby is one of those unreliable narrators, so you have to take everything with a pinch of salt and kind of try to read between the lines. And this is something really good about this novel, okay? We see Mary Hartley, and indeed every other character, through Charles' eyes. But there are moments here and there where we can see what he truly thinks of them. So he's not really in love with Mary Hartley herself. He's conjured up this idealized image of who she is. You know, bear in mind that she was his first love. So he hasn't seen her in a really long time. They were probably teenagers, I think, when they met and when they had their little relationship that never really amounted to much. And he's now in his 60s, okay? So how much does he know Mary Hartley? But not at all, really. But he is convinced that he loves her, he wants her back, and he does everything in his power to do that. And a lot of it is quite creepy, but there's also dark humor throughout, so it's also quite funny. And because we're seeing things from his perspective, you have to take everything that happens, as I say, with a pinch of salt. A lot of people show up. I'm not going to go into every character that shows up because, you know, I don't want to spoil the novel, and it'd be hard to talk about some of them without spoiling the novel, but lots of other people also show up. But one of the most important characters that shows up a lot is Araby's cousin James. Now, James, in many ways, is the complete opposite to Charles. He's virtuous. He's a Buddhist, so he's a very spiritual person. He's not attached to sex and food, horrible food anyway, but in the way that Charles Araby is. So he's the opposite, and he's a really lovely character, and it's really good to see them in contrast and see how Araby tries to be better as a person but keeps failing. Now, this is a really long novel, and I think that the stronger sections are the early sections in the novel. I feel like as I read on, the novel it never became dull, it never became boring, it never really became repetitive or anything like that, but it had less and less action, and yeah, I was glad when I was done with it. But the early sections, probably more than the first half of the novel, is so good that I love the novel as a whole because of that. And what's interesting is that Charles Araby is such a horrible human being. I mean, it's such a horrible character. So if he existed, he would be a terrible person. So as a reader, I found myself judging him a lot of the time, judging him quite harshly and negatively, okay? So particularly in the way he treats Mary Hartley. But at the same time, you know, I couldn't help but being empathetic toward him. There is something like he won me over, even though he's horrible, you know. So it is a very thought-provoking novel in that way, because you're constantly checking yourself and where your empathies lie. And, you know, we've all done things in our lives that we regret. We probably haven't acted that well towards certain people at certain points. And reading this novel kind of brings all that, or at least it brought all that up to the surface for me. So it is a novel that will make you think a lot about your own life and your own behavior, and also other people's behavior, but mostly because it's a first-person narrative and you get into Charles Araby's mind in such an intimate way. I think this novel will make you think about yourself more than about other people. The Sea has great scenes, very good set pieces. The dialogue is amazing. I mean, Iris Murdoch had such an ear for dialogue, and it's so funny. It is darkly funny, so you might be upset by some of the stuff that happens. I personally was, and I took everything with a pinch of salt, and, you know, I stood at a very safe distance from the material, and there wasn't anything nasty or anything that I couldn't deal with. There's nothing graphic or anything like that at all that I can recall. It's just human behavior, okay? You get very close to that, but the dialogue is so good, and it's darkly funny. The whole novel is funny from page 1 till the last page. As soon as I put this novel down, I thought about who should read this novel, who should read this book. I'm not really sure. I think there are probably other British authors that are contemporary to Iris Murdoch that if you're into them, you'll probably, and if you like them, you'll probably gel with Iris Murdoch's writing style. So I'm thinking like, I don't know, Muriel Sparks, so people like that, I don't know. People from that time, from the kind of middle 20th century, Penelope Lively, I don't know, Penelope Fitzgerald, rather, I don't know, people like that. But one thing that I thought is that I am glad that I didn't read this book when I was younger, okay? I wish I had read, before I read it, I thought, oh, I should have read Iris Murdoch by now. I should have read The Sea by now. It's been on my radar for many years. I mean, it was published before I was born, but not long before I was born. But anyway, before I was born. And, you know, it's been on my radar for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. And by that, I mean that I've heard people, I've had friends who've read it. I don't know, I've heard about it. I've read about it. I've read around it. But, you know, I just never really found the time to read it. And now that I have read it, I'm glad that I didn't read it earlier. I think this novel requires you to have some life experience, some considerable life experience. You don't have to be in your 60s. And, you know, I believe that life experience is not necessarily linked to age. So some younger people might have more life experience than older people, you know. It's just how life has been. But I think it's important to just get the interplay between the different characters and the relationships and you know, how they talk and the impact of their past. I think it helps if you have a bit of a past. Now, the book for this month, March 2022, as I record this, is The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. Now, I've actually already read it, but I won't tell you anything about it. I'm going to record my review of that soon, and I'm going to release it before the end of this month, and that's the way it's going to go. So a new review for the 12 books for 2022 at the end of the month, probably on the last Saturday. No promises on that, but towards the end of every month, there will be a review for each of those books. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Take care. Bye.